All right, all right. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Craig Pasta Jardula here live. We're going to be watching this tape, but I am live here in Nicaragua on a beach in San Juan del Sur. Let you take a look at what's outside my window really quickly, ladies and gentlemen. This is what I'm looking at right over there. That's what I got going on right now. I'm actually here in Nicaragua. I haven't come back to the States yet because I was planning on going to Venezuela, and I kind of had to stay put to see if my visa would come through. Unfortunately, it looks like it did not come through. Making sure the microphone is on. And it looks like I will not be going to Venezuela to observe the election. That's okay. I got many people on the ground. I gave my partner, Gloria Guillo, many questions to ask election officials, activists, the whole nine yards. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But why am I in Nicaragua? We should talk about that briefly. I came to Nicaragua, invited by the government to come witness and cover as a journalist the revolution anniversary, their anniversary of their revolution from 1979, which takes place on July 19th, when the Sandinistas beat back the Contra years ago and obtained their national sovereignty. And every year they celebrate this in Managua. The president gets to speak. The speech was a lot like his speech last year. It was very much an anti-imperialist style speech, letting the West and their allies know that Nicaragua will maintain its own sovereignty and won't go along with whatever the West tells them. And it was a major celebration. I got to say this so much. In Nicaragua, out of all the 7 Latin American countries I've been to in the last 3 years, Nicaragua has the most people supporting their government. Why? People need to ask that question. We'll put it up on the screen. Why do Nicaraguans support Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas? I hope I spelled that word right, because I always spell Sandinistas wrong. It's because the Sandinista government has put themselves on the side of the poor. It's like we were talking about today on the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. Dr. Wilmer Leon talked about the fact is that a lot of times sanctions, which is an act of war in which the United States government will thrust upon all these small Latin American countries and other countries too as well. I mean, they put sanctions on Russia, they put sanctions on China, they put sanctions everywhere. Sanctions sometimes have the tendency to backfire, right? Like, so in other words, though, the objective of the sanctions is when the United States government wants to change the behavior of a certain government, right? So for instance, when it comes to Venezuela, right, they put these heavy crushing sanctions on them. They move them out of the global economy. You know, they box them out of sort. They throw them out. They tell their allies, the United States, is that if they do business with these countries that have sanctions, that we won't do business with them. And these sanctions that we're talking about tend to backfire a lot of times, because what it does, there's a sense of nationalism that comes when there's a lot of sanctions. So instead of sweating the people out and starving them out and making them turn on the government, and they'll always have buyers for that, right? People will do that. There are people who want that government out. And, you know, it's not like, you know, what people sometimes think, that every Latin American country has got a bunch of people running around with a Che Guevara shirt on going Viva la Revolucion. No, there's a lot of people in these countries that want the United States and their capitalism to come in so they can do business, especially the bourgeoisie, right? The managerial class, the ownership class. A lot of times they want to be able to openly trade with the United States, so they don't want the sanctions involved, so they kind of push back against their governments. But when it comes to this particular country in Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega has put himself and the Sandinistas on the side of the poor and the working class. And with their social economic government, because it's very interesting, because a lot of people think that, you know, the people here are very leftist and liberal. They're not. Socially, they're very conservative, very religious, whatnot. I say in Nicaragua, it feels like a bunch of Trumpers who speak Spanish. But when the government does have this economic model of socialism, they provide healthcare, schools, education, roads, and those things really do help people out. They pull people out of poverty. And Nicaragua is also a country that is 95% food efficient. That was like 3 years ago. So they might even be 100% at this point. In other words, the rallying cry from a lot of people in the Sandinistas government and the citizens of Nicaragua, when the heavy sanctions from the Renacer Act was thrown on them, was, we don't need you. We can feed ourselves. That doesn't mean they have challenges moving forward, that they got to find some way to boost their economy. But they have put themselves, the government, on the side of the poor. They are moving in the right direction. And that's why you'll see a lot of Sandinistas. I have some great videos. You'll see a lot of Sandinistas in the streets having a great time. They're very proud of their national sovereignty. You know, there's no military bases, United States military bases in Nicaragua. So Daniel Ortega can sit there and go, Yankee, go home. Very different than Colombia, very different than Honduras, where there's military bases all over the place. There is a military industrial complex of sorts in some of these other countries. But mainly just the governments are forced to do business with the United States, so they buy weapons. There's no military industrial complex in Nicaragua, right? So all their money they use and whatnot goes to the people. And like I said, the infrastructure alone, my first year here 3 years ago for the election, they flew me out to Bilwi, which is on the Caribbean coast. And they had built just recently a road from Managua to Bilwi. And it wasn't that way. You'd have to take 2-3 days to get across the country and get to Bilwi because they didn't have the infrastructure to do it. Well, the Sandinistas, that's what they did. They built roads. So now the free market opens up. I know you libertarians and you conservatives like to hear that. Now the free market opens up and they're able to trade, they're able to move goods and services around, and that just brings people out of poverty. People can now get jobs. They can feed themselves. They can put a roof over their head. They can put food on the table. They can send their kids to school. They can buy the uniform. That was the big thing when they had the two classes when the Somozas were in power, from what I understood, or that opposition government of sorts, was that they would always shut the lower class out. Like, poor kids couldn't go to school simply because they couldn't afford the uniform. When the Sandinistas government came in, they made sure that all children can afford the uniform and participate in school. And that is something that these people really love about their government. You know, they want their national sovereignty. And in the 7 Latin American countries I've been to in the last 3 years, none more evident than Nicaragua as far as the people, the Sandinistas, supporting the government. So that's why Nicaraguans support Daniel Ortega. Now, Daniel Ortega is getting up there in age. His speech was very methodical and slow. He seems to have all his faculties, but there's a lot of talk, the chatter, or the scuttlebutt, is what they like to call it in the military, that you hear is who's going to run next election? Who's going to be the next president? Is it going to be his wife, who is his vice president that helps run the country right now? Or is it going to maybe be his son, Laureano? Is he going to step up? This is a young, energetic guy, educated in the States. He's bilingual. I got to speak to him 3 years ago. We were talking about Bitcoin and what El Salvador was doing Bitcoin, and he has volcanoes over here. If he would consider maybe having Bitcoin come in as a national currency. And he had said that they have already kind of looked around and talked to private entities, and they're seeing what's going on. But now he's had some time to sit back, and, I think this guy can be a young, beautiful, progressive leader of this country. Once again, I don't know all the ins and outs of the Nicaraguan government and their geopolitics, but he always seems to be on the forefront. There was a big conference the first day we all got in town, and Laureano was there speaking, and he does a lot of work. In fact, when we were here for the elections, it was Laureano that was kind of leading in the Russian delegation to go speak, to hear Daniel Ortega talk at his acceptance speech when he won the presidency. So there's all this talk about what's going on behind the scenes. A lot of people still think that Daniel Ortega can run again. So it's going to be interesting. But I think that this particular government is succeeding more than anything because they're heading in the right direction. There is growth in the country. The infrastructure has been great. They've been raising up the roof. And like, my friend Wyatt Reed says, who's with me, that everything is so different than it was, 4 or 5 years ago. You can see the progress with the country. That doesn't mean they're out of the woods completely. They still are a poor nation. Obviously, there's been talks about them moving into BRICS. The Chinese are now supposedly in here. The Taiwanese, they don't recognize Taiwan anymore. They recognize China. So we're going to see what's going to happen. There's always been talk about building a canal, something to, kind of oppose the Panama Canal, except in a sovereign country like Nicaragua, and they don't have to be told what to do when they want to use that particular canal, the Panama Canal, to get their goods and services around. So there's so much stuff going on, excitement. I will finish up with this. It's very easy to get lost when you hear a leader say, no more imperialism, get out of here, Yankee, go home, and all that. But I think the theme about this whole mindset moving forward is all built upon love, right? Like, the government showed their love and compassion for the poor people here in Nicaragua. And I think that is the plan moving through, that they're going to have the same mindset, the same mentality, this nationalistic kind of mentality that we're going to take care of the Nicaraguans as long as we're in power. That's what we see. And that's the message that I got from this whole trip. It's all about love. It's not just about being an anti-imperialist. It's about how do we take care of our people. When we put their best interest in mind, then we can be successful. That has been the plan, and that is why they are successful. So that's why the Nicaraguans support Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas. Okay, let's get into it, guys. Let's talk about this stuff here. Let me get my next section over here. Okay. Will Kamala Harris be the Democratic candidate for president, or will the DNC have an open convention right now? So what we hear right off the bat, first of all, we now know that Joe Biden, it is hot, it is humid here. We know that Joe Biden is alive. He was seen getting on Air Force One today. There was talks that he might not even be alive. He 5 days ago, I think he caught COVID for the third time. Hey, man, if you take the vaccine, there's a 98% chance you won't even get the shot. Remember that? You won't even get the shot. You won't even get the virus. If you take the shot, there's a 98% chance you won't even get the virus. Well, he's caught it 3 times. And just like everybody in independent media, alternative media, whatever you want to call it, said, they'd be switching this guy out. I think the only question was when. I said at the convention. I thought they'd have an open convention. They're doing it a couple weeks beforehand, maybe close to a month beforehand. It's right around that time. About a month beforehand, they swapped them on out. Why? And it's very interesting, and intriguing to see everybody out there like, no, this just happened. He caught COVID. This wasn't their plan all along. Yes, it was their plan all along. They didn't want to have an open democratic process. They wanted to choose their own candidate. They wanted to choose their own establishment lackey. And so far, it looks like they're doing it with Kamala Harris, but they never wanted to do that, right? They wanted to wait as long as they can so they can pick the person. I mean, if RFK had stayed inside the Democratic Party, right, and all of a sudden Joe Biden dropped out, would he be the one next in line? I don't think they would have ever allowed that. So that's why they made sure they shut him out. That's why they made sure they dragged along Joe Biden. And also, too, as well, they wanted to shield any potential candidate that they chose from any further criticisms, right? So now if they waited closer to the convention like they did right now, it's just a short sprint to November for the election. And obviously, the Kamala cop memes are out there right now. They're trying to push Kamala hard. They said she's raised record-breaking money. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. This seems just part of the game. But why are they choosing Kamala right now? Well, I don't think there's many reasons that could be why they're choosing Kamala Harris. Number one, no candidate is willing to step up right now. Regardless or not if the election process is highly unfair, very unfair, to steal an election 2 times back-to-back, it's going to be tough. A lot easier to steal primaries because it's your own party, right? So I don't think that everybody's like, oh, I thought for sure. I was saying the odds-on favor would be Gavin Newsom. But maybe Gavin Newsom doesn't want to do this. Maybe they'd rather wait for Gavin Newsom to run in 2028 instead of getting wiped on the floor by Donald Trump. But the thing is about it is that, really, to tell you the truth, I don't believe that they're leaving anything up to chance right now. I believe that they already have a plan in mind. And they're going to run Kamala probably at this point because they want to lose, right? And people are saying, well, why what do you mean they want to lose? Why would they want to lose? Why wouldn't they want to maintain power? Well, the establishment is always going to maintain power. Same donors, same bosses, different party. It's just a 2-party illusion. They're still going to get the results they want, right? Because they control all the donors. But the only way to really technically save the Democratic Party is to lose. Hey, there he is to lose. And therefore, you can raise money off being anti-Trump. Not much, buddy. How you doing? All right, I'll see you in a little bit. I'm going to finish up here, and you'll text me, let me know where you're at. All right, buddy. That's Wyatt Earp, everybody. Fastest beer in the West. There he goes. Well, if you lose this presidency over here, right, and the establishment is still in control, because let's be honest, if anybody thinks that Donald Trump's this big anti-establishment candidate, I got a beachfront property to sell you in Ohio. Do they have beachfront property? They probably have a lakefront property. You know what I mean. I'm going to sell you a nice piece of land in the Everglades, right? I mean, his policies are so aligned. They're not that much different than Joe Biden's, especially when it comes to foreign policy. Yeah, Donald Trump didn't start any new wars, but he didn't end any old wars, and he did fund a lot of other wars, like the war in Yemen. And at the end of the day, Zelensky got his guns and weapons when Donald Trump was in office. You know, he set the table for Joe Biden to come in there, corn pop with Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and all these other guys, and to saber rattle hard with Russia. But at the end of the day, they're not that different. He's not disbanding NATO. He's not getting rid of NATO. We're not pulling out of NATO. That's not happening. He's reversed on that. I mean, he's still running around with people like Lindsey Graham. He chose J.D. Vance, who's funded by Peter Thiel and Palantir. Peter Thiel, who's on the board of the Bilderberg Group. Now, I know y'all are watching on Rumble and saying, well, Pastor, you're on Rumble, and Rumble is owned by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel does have a piece of it, but it's very much different than getting direct funding, a lot of money from Peter Thiel to do a certain thing. And now the fear is, I think, you know, Gloria, my good friend Gloria Guillo, she has a great article out in Covert Action magazine about Nicaragua and the love. But she was talking about, and she just made this point, and we had the show the other day with LOL, that, you know, it's very, very easy, in fact, for, excuse me, somebody's coming over here. It's very, very easy, in fact, the reason why with J.D. Vance and now Donald Trump becoming president, Donald Trump, the assassination attempt, he can do whatever he wants, and people are going to go along with it. Remember when Donald Trump says, I can be on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and they'll still vote for me, doesn't make a difference. Well, at this point, after the assassination attempt, and even got people like Mark Zuckerberg going, oh, my God, that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. He was once Jesus on earth. He's now God in heaven. He can do anything and get away with it. So the biggest fear, you know, when you talk about Palantir being a surveillance company, mass surveillance, all our data and everything, and you got J.D. Vance coming in, well, you know, with the election situation, and it seems like they're using the election situation and blaming immigrants and the lack of IDs to enforce more IDs on people, more QR codes. So with J.D. Vance coming in there, and Donald Trump choosing J.D. Vance, you got to watch out for more track and trace policies, more, you know, CBDCs. All this stuff can happen under Donald Trump. A war with China can happen under Donald Trump. So you got to be careful. The Manchurian Candidate, the wolf in sheep's clothing. But that being said, I don't think that they care, you know, if it's Kamala Harris or somebody else. If they want to lose, they'll choose Kamala Harris. So the question is, will Kamala be the Democratic candidate for president, or will the DNC have an open convention? I think things are going on behind closed doors, guys. I don't think it's shut and dry that it is Kamala Harris. Gavin Newsom might have opted out and says, I'm going to support Kamala Harris right away. You know what I'm saying? But anything could happen. There are still conversations going on behind closed doors. They have a few weeks to figure this out. So we'll see what's going on. But I'm of the belief now, and I wasn't necessarily of the belief last year, that the Democrats want to lose, and therefore they will choose Kamala Harris, assuring that they'll lose. Remember, Kamala Harris still hasn't won one single delegate in any primary at all. She didn't win one delegate in California. She didn't run in a primary this time. She's never been chosen by the voters, not even the Democratic voters, let alone the people. And now she's being anointed so far as the chosen one to be the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. So we will see. We'll be at the Democratic convention, and we will talk more about that. Okay, third subject, last thing I want to talk about right now. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Let's talk about Venezuela. Okay? Let me put this up. Okay, so it says down below, why is the U.S. acting desperate when it comes to the Venezuelan general election? Very, very simple. Man, it's hot, guys. It is humid in this place. Venezuela is a piece of property, a land, a country that the United States corporations, the fascist entity of the United States wants. Okay, it has the greatest resource for energy. It has oil. And at the end of the day, the United States wants it back. They wanted it back for quite some time, just like they want Cuba back, just like they want Nicaragua back. They want Venezuela back more than any other country. Okay? But the problem is, there people are writing articles now, and especially a lot of leftists saying, oh, there's election interference. Okay, well, what exactly is election interference? It's different than election engineering. There's two things you got to understand. So election interference is legal, right? In a sense, you're not doing anything illegal. You're using the mainstream media to have narrative management, to get a certain rhetoric out there that the people really don't like the oppressive government. And every single article, the United States, the same playbook, the authoritarian leader, Nicolas Maduro, right? People are oppressed and they're starving and they're fleeing because of the mismanagement of Nicolas Maduro. It has nothing to do with the sanctions, nothing to do with the stripping of resources, nothing to do with the economic blockade, nothing to do at all with that. And come on, I mean, it's very easy to put this together to understand why Venezuela has been struggling so long. Is that they were cut off from a lot of their natural resources, their oil as well, and they had heavy sanctions thrown on them, and they were shut out of the global economy, sending them in a spiral down. All right, but what's going on now is their stabilization. So it's a little bit different, right? Election interference is going to be using the media to set that narrative out there, right? There's little personal stories in CNN, right? So many migrants are waiting on the election in Venezuela to see if they can return home to see their family, right? They make these personal stories. One from the New York Times, I believe it was, or the New York Post, they get them mixed up. Why is Nicolas Maduro on the ballot 13 times in Venezuela, right? Because in Venezuela, they list all the parties and who the parties' nominees are, who their candidates are, they put right below. And Nicolas Maduro has 13 parties that are now supporting him, that they are his nominees. The major opposition has 3 parties who are endorsing him. But that's why they do it, right? And I'm going to tell you right now, that's not going to swing an election. Most people who go into the election booth, right, whether it be in Nicaragua or the United States, they know who they're voting for. They understand that. It was funny because Wyatt said, I wasn't going to vote for Nicolas Maduro, but then I saw his name on the ballot 13 times, so I decided, let's go for it and whatnot. So they're putting those stories out there right now. That is election interference. It's actually election influencing, using the media, setting stories up. It is used for certain reasons because they understand that the results are not going to come back in their favor. Polls is another way to do it, right? These tainted polls. Polls are nothing more than public propaganda because you don't know where they're getting the information from, who they're actually polling, who answered the phone. So polls can be tweaked and manipulated in a certain way. So all this election interference is going on. They're doing that. They're manufacturing consent for something to come later. Let's not forget that Donald Trump was like the most peaceful president of all time, and he tried to whack Nicolas Maduro. He was unsuccessful, but he tried to kill him with a drone. It didn't work. So what they're doing now is they are manufacturing consent to either have a regime change, to keep their foot on the neck, to maybe remove Nicolas Maduro, again, try to kill him. Who knows what they're trying to do? But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to say that the election is illegitimate before even one ballot gets cast, right? Election engineering is different. Election engineering is actually illegal. Election engineering is when they either, inflate the votes, they stuff the ballots, they remove voters so they can't vote, they switch the numbers and the tallies. It's an illegal process. Election engineering is actual cheating. It's like stacking the deck, doing a card from the bottom. I mean, you're actually cheating when it comes to election engineering. The United States, the deep state, the government, whoever's behind what happens in elections in the United States, they're very easy to engineer, especially with mass mail-in ballots that get shotgunned out with all these lists. There's somebody. You don't need a voter or voters to swing an election in America. You just need a ballot. Very different than Venezuela. The United States cannot engineer that election, from what I've heard so far. Look, there's a lot of questions I have. I want to get on the ground and talk about these things and ask certain questions. I want to scrutinize that election through and through. But the process I understand in Venezuela, it's a national process. It's a national election. The voter has to have ID, has to go to their designated spot. It's a polling spot, not a vote center, which is just BS. They created it in the United States, and they sell it as like, oh, this is great for everybody. You're more accessible now. It's easier to vote. And you can vote at any vote center. It's going to be in the computer on the cloud, right? Like, so now you know that there's already a system that's working on a cloud that it's cooked to the internet, right? And they say there's no internet in the machines, right? And there's different machines. There's machines that count the vote. There's machines that cast the vote. Venezuela's system's a national system. So what they do is they have these thumbprint identifications when you go in. You have to show your ID. You have to go to your designated spot. You have to go to your designated room, right? You have to put your thumbprint down, and the thumbprint will be recognized by the machine who the voter is. And then you'll cast a vote on the machine, and we'll spit you out a piece of paper. You'll take that piece of paper, and then you put that in the ballot box. So you have a chance to check. In other words, I go, my thumbprint, zing, comes out, Nicolas Maduro, zing, Nicolas Maduro, I go over the box. They open that box in front of everybody. They count the results. They put it on the door. One of the most solid, secure elections, and it's publicly verifiable, all done in the purview of the person, right? The United States can't touch that election. Jimmy Carter said this is one of the best election systems around years ago. I really want to witness this election, so I'm hoping I get a call today and get over there. It might not happen. It probably won't happen, but a lot of boots on the ground. I'll be able to talk to people. The United States can't engineer the Venezuelan election. They just can't. And if you can't engineer an election, you got to play the cards you're dealt. And they're playing the election interference or the election influence card because that's all they got. So that's why they're already trying to delegitimize the election before it takes place. And since people don't go over there and there's no mainstream media that will report on it, and the groups that the Venezuelan government brings, they don't bring the big popular names out there, which they really should. They can't really change the narrative that the American anti-Maduro, anti-Chavista mainstream media puts out there. So that's what's going on. It's the difference between election interference and election engineering. And that's why they do these polls. These polls are just propaganda. They are setting the table. They are manufacturing consent to interfere again in Venezuelans' sovereignty. And that is why the U.S. is acting so desperate right now, because they understand that these results probably aren't going to come back in their favor. Now, one of the other things they've done, Venezuela has found, I believe her name is Machado, right? She was the popular character. Marina Machado. I think she has like 4 million followers on Instagram. She was found guilty of treason last year, and she can't run in the election. So Edmundo, her little lackey, is the guy, a diplomat, a former diplomat, who's running in a spot. So last election, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, they told people to not go home and vote. The opposition said, don't vote. The election's already rigged. We're not going to participate in this process. Get out of here. This is bull. So that's what's going on right now. They can't go back to that same tactic. It failed miserably. The Juan Guaido situation did not work out properly. So now they're trying to do everything they can to delegitimize the election before it takes place. They did this with Nicaragua. They were calling it a pantomime election. We were on the ground showing people the process, how smooth it was, how clean it was, how limpio it was. They're trying to do the same thing right now with Venezuela, and they're even more desperate when it comes to Venezuela because they really want that oil. There's a lot of oil. There's a lot of oil there, and they want it. Otherwise, they'll sell it to China, and that's not what we want. But that's the situation that's going on. So we're going to keep a close eye on the election, and we'll see what happens. You're going to prepare to see more articles this whole week. They've been coming out, and if you just type in Venezuelan election or Venezuela's election, you can do it on YouTube. You have the little mainstream media lackeys with their small show, and they use all the buzzwords like authoritarian dictator Nicolas Maduro. No, Nicolas Maduro has been elected twice, right? In a fair, free, open election, right? He's the chosen leader by the people with their national sovereignty. He is the man who they want in Venezuela. Now, is he the overwhelming favor? Is it a little bit different in Venezuela than it is over here in Nicaragua? I would say so. I've never been. But for what I understand, the bourgeoisie still exists in Venezuela. They're still in Caracas. It's not like Cuba where they threw all the bourgeoisie out and say, get out of here. And you have like old maids and butlers that work for the rich in Cuba that are now taking care of the houses because the bourgeoisie was thrown out and they've turned them into museums and such. Venezuela, they're still there. The opposition is still there. Remember, Juan Guaido was running around the country before they grabbed him and tried to rip his shirt off and they went crazy. But that happens all the time. The opposition is alive and well in Venezuela, and I really wanted to go experience it. It's a shame I did not. But all we can say is we'll get him next time. So that's what's going on in Venezuela, guys. I am in Nicaragua. Craig Pasta Jardula, we love you. We'll see you soon. I'm out.